Depending on when this video comes out, free agency either started already or it starts tomorrow, and considering some of the names that could be on the move, they may one day be considered for one of the biggest offseason moves of all time. Actually, I can think of at least one guy that's definitely about to join that list for the second or third time. And to commemorate the occasion, today we're looking at some of the biggest offseason moves of all time that are already set in stone, ones of which we can fully evaluate in terms of impact and what it did to the NBA. And if you want to go to a game next season once free agency makes this league look completely unrecognizable, you can do so with the SeatGeek app. SeatGeek app pulls tickets from all over the web and has them in one place, so buying is really easy, and it also assures you're going to be getting the best value for your ticket. While you're doing your search, each ticket is ranked with a score from 1 to 100 that lets you know if you're getting a good deal or not for your purchase, and on top of that, it gives you a detailed view of what you would see from your seat if you were actually there. If you're interested in downloading this app, the links are going to be in both the comment section and highlighted in the description. If you're still on the fence, consider using my promo code DOM2K to get $20 off your first purchase. This is the app I used when I went to the Warriors and Magic game last season, and it made the whole process really simple, so I definitely recommend this for you. How is it even possible that a team would willingly trade Wilt Chamberlain before he was even officially out of his prime? Well, if you think players today have bargaining chips once they have a year left on their contracts, check this out. In the summer of 1968, the Sixers had a coaching vacancy that Wilt would often inquire about. At a certain point, he suggested to management that he become a player coach, and they said they would think it over while he went on his vacation to the West Coast. Well, that was a franchise-altering mistake because whatever it was that Wilt saw that summer while he was out west prompted him to return to Sixers management, telling them he would never play in Philadelphia again. So, he went from offering to play for and coach the team to "I'm never playing here again" over a single vacation. Any of you want to bet on what he saw out there? But that's not even the best part. See, this was back when players could threaten to go play for the ABA if they didn't get what they wanted. It probably would have prompted legal action like he did with Rick Barry, but the end result would still be no Wilt Chamberlain on the team, so they traded him to one of the only places he said he would play, Los Angeles. It's too bad this one didn't happen sooner because A, we would have gotten close to a decade of seeing Wilt and Russell go head to head in the finals, and B, Jerry West probably wouldn't have had to suffer so many gut-wrenching losses to the Celtics. Regardless of the timing, this was a pretty big deal. This was after the 100-point game, the averaging 50 points in a season. He was basically just really well established by this point as one of the most dominant forces in sports history, and now he was being dealt to a franchise trying to snap a 6-series losing streak in the finals to the Celtics and to his rival Bill Russell. This was also very significant because it was one of the first times the idea of a traditional Big Three was brought up. You had the NBA logo in Jerry West, what we now consider the Michael Jordan of the 60s in Elgin Baylor, and possibly the best center to ever play in Wilt himself. Of course, like most Big Threes in history, this one simply didn't live up to the hype because injuries caused Baylor to decline rapidly, and they were only able to crank out one championship in 4 trips to the NBA Finals. Oh, and also Baylor barely played another game after 1970. To add insult to injury, they should have beaten the Celtics, who were pretty much falling apart by 1969. But in Game 7, Bill Russell saw balloons in the rafters that the Lakers had ready to celebrate a title, and the rest was history. Still, this offseason move earns its place in history for being the first time an MVP was traded in the very next offseason, the fact that it resulted in Jerry West actually winning a title instead of being 0-10 in the finals, and it creating the first officially recognized Big Three. The Kareem move in 1975 would definitely be number 1 on this list if it were being ranked by significance and not timing, because this move almost single-handedly altered an entire decade that still affects the NBA and its culture today. Again, this might lead you to ask, how on earth did one of history's top big men get traded, especially so early in his career? Wilt was 32 and wasn't getting any better, but Kareem was only 27 and already had a title with the team. Well, the answer is simply Kareem. He just didn't want to play for Milwaukee anymore, and he told them as such. It wasn't close enough to his family, the city didn't fit him, the culture didn't fit him, so he was dead set on leaving with zero chance to change his mind. Oh, and like Wilt, he threatened to jump to the ABA as well if they weren't going to trade him. I've got a heavy feeling Kawhi or Kobe Bryant would have used this tactic if it were available to them. So he was traded with nothing close of equal value going back to the Bucks, and just like that, literally all of NBA history took a different path. See, it's 2018 and we could be talking about the Bucks' storied franchise and how Kareem helped lead them to multiple championships, but instead we've got the storyline with the Showtime Lakers and one of the most iconic duos and teams in the history of sports. Of course it took about 5 years, but once Magic got to the Lakers, Kareem was there waiting for him with a table set, and together they went on to clash with the Celtics to basically recreate basketball in the 1980s. There's no way to tell where the NBA would have went without this rivalry dominating the decade, or if the Showtime Lakers were never a thing. This could easily be considered the biggest offseason move in NBA history considering its impact on the league as a whole. And now we move on to the third scenario involving the Lakers, and as you might have guessed, Shaq leaving the Orlando Magic in 1996 is probably responsible for more than a few storylines we grew up with. And for the third time, we ask, how did this happen? Well, in this case, it's more of a who let this happen. Shaq didn't have the ABA to threaten this time, so the Magic just kind of really royally screwed this one up. In 1996, salaries worked differently. The luxury tax didn't exist and there was no max salary. The salary cap itself existed, but because of bird rights, the Magic were allowed to go over the cap to sign one of their own players. If you're following along, this literally means the Magic could have told Shaq to name his price and the negotiations could have ended right there. Shaquille O'Neal would have been with the Magic probably forever. Instead, Orlando was greedy for no reason and lowballed him with an offer of $54 million over 4 years when guys less talented than him were being offered over $100 million. So that was mistake number one. Mistake number two was that on top of the lowball offer, they tried to justify it by criticizing his rebounding and defense. So a guy that was only 23 years old, 7'1" and 300 pounds while still being able to run the floor, had already led the franchise to the finals and was putting up 23 and 11 with 2 blocks a game in his contract year, was lowballed and critiqued by his own team during the free agency process. Oh, but wait, there's more. Mistake 3 was telling him they were trying to leave room for Penny Hardaway down the road, which made him feel like he wasn't the main focus of the franchise. Maybe this would have been a reasonable request if they hadn't have already criticized him twice, because by that point it seemed more like insult to injury. So finally, in a poll that ran that summer, about 90% of the people that voted in Orlando said that Shaq wasn't worth the money he was trying to get, because remember, this was the 90s and it would have been hard to justify any basketball player making $100 million. So after being lowballed and criticized by both Orlando management and the fans, he fell right into Los Angeles hands, who had been aggressively pursuing him, and the rest is history. This created the third dominant Lakers dynasty, the Kobe and Shaq era, Phil Jackson's third three-peat team. It's hard to understate what this move did to NBA history. It also furthered the Lakers' status as a storied franchise, and it's crazy because this would have never happened if someone in Orlando would have just used the slightest bit of common sense. A little over a decade later, we come to a summer that still has ramifications for the league today. Boston's Big Three is often called overrated because they're seen as such a special team despite only winning one title, but you can't say enough about their importance to what the league has become today, even if it's a bad thing. The Celtics really struck gold by landing Ray Allen, who was no longer a part of the Supersonics' plans, and KG, who was reluctant to ever leave Minnesota before this. Garnett was actually very close to landing with the Lakers, but Kevin McHale chose to deal with former teammate Danny Ainge over helping the Lakers create another potential dynasty, and thus the first Big Three of the modern era was created. We're not talking about Big Threes that were just a superstar and some other really good players. No, we're talking about 3 guys who were literally the man of their own teams, averaging far over 20 points a game coming together. Winning a championship? That was fully expected. As a matter of fact, most people had them down for about 2 or 3 of them. But what they did that was more significant was contribute to the super team culture that has basically dominated the last 10 years. I won't say they're the entire reason that LeBron made his own super team in Miami, but we can safely say they were the biggest reason. Before Boston came along, LeBron was well on his way to owning the Eastern Conference. The Pistons were falling apart, his teams were winning 60+ games, and any day now, he was going to get just one more decent player to play with, and nobody in the East was going to have a chance. But when Boston assembled that team, they beat LeBron twice in 3 years, and that loss in 2010 was the last straw. Not only did the Celtics have the Big Three, but Rondo also emerged as a top point guard, and Boston management had made it clear that they were going to do anything to retool that roster every summer to have it ready to make a run at a title. In response, LeBron made what was the biggest free agent decision in NBA history up until 2016. Him joining the Miami Heat was so insane for so many reasons. If you were watching basketball in 2010 and before, it was hard to imagine that 2 players as good as Wade and James were going to share the floor together, let alone still have Bosh as a third option. That move incited hate from a city on a scale that we literally never seen, and probably made him the biggest villain in history before KD took that title by a mile. It was literally a whole saga about if they'd fail, when LeBron was going to get his first ring, them being dubbed the Heatles. It created a culture and feel in basketball that we've never seen before. And we now know that this ended up being so significant because of the thought process it inspired. When LeBron did that, a player like KD got the idea that he could be a superstar and just forget about what everyone else thought to go do whatever his heart desired in free agency. So he took it a step further by helping to create the greatest team of all time, and I'm not adding that as a part of this list only because we're too close to the ball dropping. We already know they've won 2 championships, but unlike the other moves, we can't fully evaluate the fallout of that decision yet. We don't know what players' response to it in the long term are, what LeBron ends up doing in the next week that'll probably be influenced by trying to beat this team, how many championships they ultimately win. There's just a lot of factors that we can't say much about yet, despite the fact that we clearly know it really might be the biggest offseason move of all time. Who knows yet? But we do know one thing. If LeBron does anything other than stay in Cleveland in the coming week, it'll join this list as one of the biggest offseason moves of all time. And that's what I got for you guys today. Make sure to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed, and hit the bell next to my name if you want notifications because free agency is coming up and we're gonna have a lot to discuss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.